The DA will be in the High Court in Pretoria tomorrow to challenge the Employment Equity Amendment Act, which it says affords the Labour Minister unchecked powers to impose quotas on companies. The second biggest partner in the Government of National Unity has launched a constitutional challenge to Section 15A of the legislation, which gives the executive authority to put equity targets on 18 economic sectors. The DA insists that these quotas destroy jobs and harm the economy. Newzroom Afrika's senior politics reporter Ziyanda Ngcobo is at the party's headquarters, where federal leader Helen Zille has just concluded a media briefing. Good afternoon to you, Ziyanda. What did the DA's federal leader have to say about approaching the courts tomorrow?
I have to correct you that she's not the federal leader. She's the Federal Council chairperson. The federal leader is John Steenhuisen, whose affidavit has been deposed to the North Gauteng High Court. They're arguing that it's this Section 15A within the Amendment Act that they have an issue with. They're saying that it actually is going to double down on what they say has already been a failed experiment by the government and employment equity laws, which they argue have done nothing to empower those that it claims to be wanting to target. They also add that if you just listen to the surveys of businesses, they'll tell you that part of the reason why there is disinvestment is because of, firstly, electricity or energy insecurity, but they also cite the issue of race laws, as Helen Zille put it earlier on. So they're arguing that it's this particular section that is unconstitutional. It doesn't it actually flies in the face of Section 9.2 of our Constitution, which talks about equality before the law. And also, they're arguing that, well, while the Constitution does allow for fair discrimination, the Labour Minister has the onus now to prove how this Employment Amendment, Equity Amendment Act actually is in line with this. Let's listen to what she had to say.
We've had an employment equity regime which was meant to drive employment equity for the last 25 years. And we've seen since 2008 unemployment almost double, from 5.5 million on the expanded definition to 11.1 million last year. And that is primarily as a result of failed government policies that drive away investment and discourage growth. That wasn't their intention, I'm sure, but it is the effect. And we've done many surveys of potential investors who decide not to invest or who disinvest from South Africa, and they name electricity uncertainty and race laws as the primary factor that drive away investment.
And so, Vuyo, the other argument that the DA is going to be making in court tomorrow is to say that, in essence now, with this Employment Equity Amendment Act, it will effectively impose quotas, and that this has been declared to be unconstitutional. Helen Zille making the example of KwaZulu-Natal, where there's a high concentration or population of Indians, and saying that, well, if you're going to impose quotas on a province such as KwaZulu-Natal, and you say that you want to have a certain, representation of a certain demographic, this will be to the exclusion of the Indian population. She used an example of a former South African Police Service official who qualified for the job but did not get into that particular position because, the service had already reached a particular quota. And so this, she says, flies in the face of an inclusive economy, and that jobs are actually going to be lost. Let's listen to what she said about that.
The best way to empower majorities is to grow the economy. It's as simple as that. Instead, we have policies that shrink the economy, which means you get an already empowered elite fighting with each other over a shrinking number of jobs. And it's an insane system. We also believe it's unconstitutional because it's manifestly unfair. And when you discriminate to achieve redress, which we support in specific circumstances, we do not believe that this Act meets that benchmark. It is specifically going to discriminate against particular categories of people. One thinks of Indians in KwaZulu-Natal and coloured people in the Western Cape, for example. It's just a consequence of our history that there's a very large concentration of Indian people in KwaZulu-Natal and a very significant number of coloured people in the Western Cape. But if you apply national targets to the Indian population, I don't know exactly what percentage the Indian population makes up of South Africa, but I don't think it could be more than 3%. So if a national target is imposed on firms in KwaZulu-Natal, how many Indian people are going to have to lose their jobs to meet the targets and the quotas?
Before I let you go, Ziyanda, did she speak at all about how this particular move may affect their increasingly frosty relationship with their senior partner in the Government of National Unity, the ANC?
Absolutely. The question undoubtedly came up and, a very trite answer from the Federal Council chairperson to say, well, they didn't get into politics to be popular. They are not in the Government of National Unity to serve the interests of the ANC. Otherwise, in the next election, they'll get a 2% vote. There were also questions about whether or not, the DA will be taking up the offer that, or the white flag that was extended by President Cyril Ramaphosa at the May Day commemorations on the 1st of May, where he said that he'd love to hear why the DA is so anti-transformation and what the issue really is with this Employment Amendment Act. And, she chuckled a bit before saying that, look, she has her counterparts in the ANC in the form of Fikile Mbalula. They have had 7 scheduled meetings. He's only made it to 2 of those meetings. And in one instance, he arrived an hour and a half late. So in essence, she says she would love to continue engaging with the ANC, but even the issues or the clearinghouse mechanism is useless, to quote her verbatim. And so, in essence, this is a case again of them speaking over each other or taking political matters to the courts. However, we'll hear what the ANC has to say in response to the arguments that are made in court and what has taken place at this briefing today.
Ziyanda Ngcobo, thank you very much with that update, of course, following that media briefing by the DA's federal chairperson on the eve, of course, of them approaching the High Court. A matter that is definitely not sitting well with the ANC, chatting to some of their leaders at the weekend. Gauteng had a lekgotla at the weekend. They are very unhappy about the relationship of the ANC with the Democratic Alliance.